At the palace, Oluchi recounted her experience the night she rescued Adago from the forest to Queen Chimwanya, including the recent event of Adago discovering the necklace at the village stream. When she presented the necklace to Queen Chimwanya, the queen was lost for words. Tears flowed freely from her eyes. She was filled with renewed hope. The locket in her hands was the same one Princess Adago had been adorned with moments after she was born. Early the next morning, the queen appointed some chiefs and warriors, and they all set out for Nto village. Upon arriving, they were struck with disbelief when they saw Adago. "This is my daughter Adago," Queen Chimwanya declared. Adago, who was at this point confused by the situation, turned to Oluchi. Oluchi then explained to her how she had found her unconscious in the forest about 20 years ago with nothing but that necklace. Adago returned with her mother to Ijele Kingdom. Her arrival at the palace brought back memories, small flashes of laughter, a loving mother, and a warm home. Queen Chimwanya, who had mourned for years, could hardly believe her lost daughter stood before her. The queen embraced her with tears in her eyes. "We searched everywhere, my child, but there was no trace of you or your father." Adago simply embraced her mother tightly and said, "Mother, don't cry anymore. I believe my father is at peace wherever he is. I am home now, and I will take very good care of you." Adago reconnected with her roots, and life continued. As days passed in the palace, Adago felt a tug between the life she had known in Nto village and her newfound identity as a princess. While she was welcomed with open arms, palace life was overwhelming with its rules and etiquettes, but she knew this was where she belonged. She did not hesitate to bring Oluchi with her, as she wanted a better life for the woman whom God used to give her another chance to live. As the years went by, Princess Adago became known for her compassion, wisdom, and fairness. Queen Chimwanya was very proud of her, and she continued to teach her everything she needed to know, as she would someday take over the throne if she chose not to get married. A few years later, Oluchi passed on, but while she was alive, she was honored and given a place in the royal family. Adago, who was now in her prime, began to get a lot of suitors seeking her hand in marriage. Although most of them only wanted to marry her because according to their tradition, whoever married Adago would assume the throne as ruler of Ijele Kingdom. Only a very few of them were genuine. Amongst these suitors was Ikem, the son of a late chief in Ijele Kingdom. His words moved Adago more than the words of any man. "My princess," he would say, his voice laden with passion, "I have never encountered a heart as pure as yours. You are an embodiment of beauty and strength. Marry me, and I promise to revere and honor you for the rest of our lives." Finally swayed by Ikem's sweet words, Adago agreed to marry him. The wedding ceremony was grand and befitting for royalty. Queen Chimwanya was happy that her daughter was married to a man who loved her so much. She felt at peace knowing her daughter was in safe hands. Or so she thought. A year after Adago and Ikem got married, Queen Chimwanya fell terribly ill and became bedridden. It broke the hearts of the people of Ijele to see their warrior queen in such a pitiable condition. They decided to relieve her of the duties of the crown so that her health would be given proper attention. Adago was more concerned about the health of her beloved mother, and as a result, she handed over everything that concerned the throne to her husband, Ikem. A coronation date was fixed, and Ikem was crowned the king of Ijele Kingdom, what he had always desired. Few months later, consumed and completely weakened by the illness, Queen Chimwanya passed away. Around that same time, Ikem's attitude towards Adago began to change. Adago's heart was shattered because of her mother's passing, and she was too overwhelmed with grief to notice this change in Ikem's attitude. She would cry all day and wish that she had spent more time with her mother after being separated from her for so many years. By the time Adago recovered from her mourning season, she began to notice Ikem's withdrawn attitude. Whenever she asked him why he distanced himself from her, he would lie to her and say that he was just preoccupied with the responsibilities of being a king. One day, while taking a stroll around the palace, Adago passed by the maiden servant quarters and heard funny sounds. She prayed it would not be what she suspected, because the palace servants were forbidden from carrying out such acts while in the palace, which was their place of duty. She headed towards the room where the sound was coming from to confront the maiden and male servants who were engaging in this abominable act. As she approached the room, the sounds grew louder, and with so much anger and disgust, she pushed the door open, barging into the room. As soon as she saw the figure of the man responsible for the sounds she had been hearing, it was as though the room spun around her. Her knees buckled and she leaned on the wall to support herself from hitting the floor. The maiden, seeing that they had been caught, quickly covered up herself and went on her knees, bowing her head in shame, while the man, who was none other than King Ikem, stood up without remorse. He placed his crown back on his head and walked away from the room like nothing had happened. Still shaken by what she had just seen, Adago's heart pounded in her chest as disbelief flooded her veins. She chased after him, leaving the maiden to ponder on what her fate would be. She caught up with him and stood in front of him, staring into his eyes, wishing that what she had just witnessed was a dream. "Ikem," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What? What was that?" Ikem did not bother to look ashamed. He did not even flinch. He casually stared back at her, his eyes cold. "Adago, you are making this more dramatic than it needs to be," he said, trying to walk past her. "Are you even sorry?" she demanded, her voice breaking, hands trembling as she fought back tears. "Sorry?" Ikem chuckled. "Why should I be? I am the king of Ijele, Adago. I can get pleasure wherever and with whoever I please," he said and brushed past her, making his way back to the royal quarters. Adago could hardly breathe. The walls of her life, her love, her marriage, her authority as queen, everything she had came crashing down around her. She had not gotten over her mother's demise, and this was happening. The next few months were a blur. Ikem did not stop at that one maiden. He had his way with more of the palace maidens, and he dismissed any of them who refused to satisfy his monstrous desire. Adago could hardly show her face around the palace. She was always locked in her chambers, weeping and eating the bread of sorrow. The embarrassment and shame was too heavy for her to bear. Unfortunately, she could not do anything about it because Ikem was right. He was the king, and there was no law which stopped him from having as many women as he wanted. Sadly, Adago had transferred all her rights and inheritance to him when she agreed to marry him. The servants in the palace knew about everything. They had seen it long before she did. But nobody was willing to tell a woman who was yet to recover from the loss of her mother that her husband, the king, who was supposed to be her support system, was too busy having his way with the palace maidens. Ikem's desires were not confined to the palace. He became known in the kingdom as a promiscuous king, sleeping with any maiden of Ijele who appealed to him. He also did not hesitate to marry any of the maidens who got pregnant for him. This had never been heard of in Ijele kingdom. The people of Ijele could hardly show their faces before the people of the other kingdoms. Promiscuity wasn't the only tag Ikem wore with pride. He was also known as an extortionist. He passed decrees that heavily extorted the hard-earned money of the people of Ijele. He forcefully obtained farmlands and possessions belonging to the people, and no one dared stand against him. He did not hesitate to severely punish anyone who was bold enough to resist his authority. The loyal servants in the palace and the people of Ijele kingdom mourned their once great kingdom, which was now an object of ridicule. They desperately wished that God would perform a miracle and take them back to the time King Afamefuna, King Obiago, and Queen Chimwanya reigned. However, there was nothing they could do other than pray and hope. Adago became a shadow of herself. She was always alone in her chambers. Ikem had long since stopped performing his duties as her husband, so she lacked not only love and affection, but also a chance to have a child. She blamed herself for everything. She was also deeply pained by the suffering Ikem subjected her people to. Whenever she confronted Ikem about the way he mistreated the people of Ijele, he would shut her up and order her back to her chambers. He began to see her as an obstacle to his freedom to oppress the people of Ijele, so he decided to get rid of her. As time passed, the cruelty of Ikem's new wives to Adago became unbearable. They would mock her openly in the royal quarters, talking loud enough for her to hear. "Look at her," one of them sneered. "She can't even give him a child, yet she calls herself the queen mother. Why does our husband even keep her around when all she does is try to stop him from ruling the kingdom as he pleases?" Another added, "If I were her, I would save myself the embarrassment and leave the palace." Adago felt the sting of their words. She felt defeated. One evening, Ikem sent for Adago, and in the presence of his other wives, he began to address her. "Adago, I think it's time for you to leave," he said, looking straight into her eyes. Adago stood there, stunned, unsure of what Ikem meant. "Leave? What do you mean by leave, Ikem? This is my home." "It was," he said, cutting her short. "Things have changed. This entire kingdom now belongs to me. I decide who stays and who leaves." "And what about my place as queen? What about our marriage? What about my duty to my people?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. Ikem shrugged, not even looking at her this time. "Well, I am afraid this kingdom doesn't need you. You no longer have duties towards the people of Ijele. I am their king, and I will rule them in whatever way seems best to me. I will not allow you get in my way." Adago stared at him, tears filling her eyes. "Ikem, why is your heart hardened towards me and the people who made you their king? After everything? Ikem, I am the reason you are sitting on this throne today. Is this how you want to fulfill the promises of reverence and honor you made to me? Fine, I will leave the palace and go live amongst my people. May God be the judge of us both." "You will leave the palace and go live amongst your people." "Which people?" "My captives." "And who said you are leaving the palace?" Ikem fired back at her. "Adagu, you are leaving this kingdom, and you are forbidden from showing your face here ever again. The guards are already waiting outside to escort you to the borders of the kingdom." Adagu fell to the ground, weeping. Everything was happening so fast. Before she could process one punch, another was hitting her. How could she lose her mother, her husband, her throne, and even her citizenship almost at the same time? Why was life so cruel to her? Just when she thought she had reconnected with her roots, she was being cut from it again. The laughters and murmurings from her co-wives pierced her heart even more. These women now had more authority than her in her own kingdom. There was nothing she could do other than ignore them and face her new life as an exile. Her heart was broken. Her spirit was crushed. The chiefs of Ijele were bewildered when the news got to them. But what could they do? Anyone who dared stand up to King Ikem risked being exiled too, along with their families. So all they could extend to Adago was pity and sorrowful stares. The appointed guards led Adago away with heavy hearts. She would forever remain their queen, but they had to follow the orders given to them. At night time, they arrived at the borders of the kingdom and insisted on waiting until they were sure there was someone who would help her. But Adago rejected their offer. She knew they would be endangering their own lives and families, because Ikem, who could banish a queen from her own land, would do worse to common men like them. Shortly after the palace guards left her and made their way back to the palace, two figures approached her. Adago's will to live had been shattered into many pieces, and so she did not care if these figures approaching her would take her life. But when they came closer, she became gripped with fear and made to run away.